I was 20 years old when this happened, living in a quiet rental house on the edge of a small town in Indiana. Back then, my life was simple. I worked part-time at a hardware store, took a few community college classes, and spent most of my evenings at home. Nothing exciting ever happened around that neighborhood. It was the kind of place where you waved to the mailman, kept your doors unlocked during the day, and knew which dog belonged to which neighbor. I never thought anything bad could happen there. On the night everything started, I remember feeling unusually relaxed. It was late October, just a few days before Halloween, and the whole town had that comfortable small-town fall vibe: porch pumpkins, quiet streets, cold air drifting in through thin window gaps. I wasn't out partying or doing anything special. I had just finished dinner, cleaned up the kitchen, and sat down to finish an online assignment. It was one of those regular, slow nights where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. The house itself wasn't anything fancy. It was a small, single-level place with an old wooden porch and a long backyard that led straight into a line of trees. I used to think the backyard looked peaceful, the kind of place where you'd want to sit outside with a cup of coffee. I didn't pay much attention to it that night. I was tired. I wanted to finish my work and go to sleep early. Everything felt normal until it didn't. I had my laptop open on the table, typing out a response for one of my classes, when something small caught my attention. At first, I wasn't even sure I heard anything. It was that quiet, like a dry leaf brushing against a window. I paused for a moment listening, but the house settled a lot when the temperature dropped, so I didn't think much of it. I went back to typing. A few seconds later, I heard it again. A very light sound, like someone stepping on gravel far away. The noise wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was just enough to break that sense of normal. Enough to make my brain stop and focus. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked over to the kitchen window. Everything outside looked still. The motion light near the back door was off. The yard looked empty. Nothing moved. I told myself I was probably overthinking it. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe wind. The kind of harmless explanation that makes you feel silly for even checking. I stepped away from the window, but something about the silence felt different. Heavier. Like the house was waiting for something. When I sat back down, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. The blinds on the small side window were slightly open. I never leave them like that. And when I got closer, I saw they weren't just open. They had been pulled down and pushed aside. Just enough for someone standing outside to look in. And the worst part was, I hadn't touched them all day. The house I was renting at the time sat at the very end of a quiet residential street, the kind of road that didn't get much traffic except for neighbors coming and going. It was an older single-story place with worn siding, a narrow driveway, and a small wooden porch that creaked under your feet no matter how lightly you stepped. The inside wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen with outdated cabinets, and a long hallway that always felt darker than it should have been. Behind the house stretched a fenced backyard, maybe 30 feet deep, ending at a patch of trees that separated my property from an empty field. It was late October, and the air carried that early winter cold that crept into old houses no matter how high you turned the heat. The sun had already set by the time I got home from work around 7. That stretch of evening between 7 and 11 was usually peaceful for me. I would make dinner, catch up on school assignments, and try to stay ahead on class readings. That night wasn't supposed to be any different. I didn't have friends over, and my roommate had moved out 2 months earlier, leaving me alone in the place. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I usually liked it. I remember walking through each room after getting home, turning on lights one by one. Habit, mostly. The living room lamp always flickered once before settling into a steady glow, and the bathroom fan made a low rattling sound that I'd gotten used to. None of it bothered me. It was just the usual noise an older house makes. I heated up leftover pasta, cleaned the bowl, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. From where I sat, I could see straight down the hallway, a dim line of yellow light reflecting off the hardwood floor. I'd been renting this place for almost a year. I chose it because it was cheap, close enough to my job at the hardware store, and far enough from the highway that I didn't hear cars all night long. The landlord lived in another town, so I didn't see him much except when something needed fixing. Neighbors kept to themselves, mostly older folks who waved politely but didn't talk much. It wasn't exactly lively, but it felt safe. Predictable. I didn't feel the need to double-check locks or worry about anything happening around me. The only person I had interacted with that day was Mrs. Henson, an older woman who lived across the street. She'd mentioned her cat going missing the previous night and asked if I had seen it around. I hadn't. She seemed worried, but I didn't think much of it. People in that area often left back doors cracked open for pets. Sometimes animals wandered. It wasn't unusual. So that night, as I settled into my routine, everything felt familiar. Quiet house. Cold night. Homework to finish. Just another normal evening at the edge of town. The kind you never think twice about. The kind that feels safe enough that you don't notice small things out of place. Not at first. I went back to my assignment trying to focus on the screen, but something about the house felt different that night. Not louder. Actually quieter. The kind of quiet where you start hearing things you normally ignore. The refrigerator hum sounded sharper. The old floorboards made softer, slower pops, almost like the house was shifting under someone's weight instead of the temperature. It wasn't anything dramatic, just enough to make me pause between sentences and listen. A few minutes later, I heard a small tap from the side of the house. Just one. Not a knock. More like something lightly brushing the siding. I glanced toward the window, but the blinds were down, and I didn't feel like checking again after what I noticed earlier. I tried to shrug it off. Older houses always had random noises. Wind could make strange sounds. Animals moved around at night. All normal explanations. But even with those thoughts in my head, the feeling didn't go away. I kept typing, but I couldn't ignore the sense that something outside was moving around the yard. Not constantly, just occasionally. A faint shift of gravel. A soft crunch of leaves. They were spaced out, almost careful, like someone taking slow steps and stopping every few seconds. I sat completely still, listening. After a moment, I pushed my chair back and walked to the kitchen window again. The motion light was still off, and everything looked still. Too still, if anything. I went down the hallway to grab a sweatshirt for my room. The hall was dim, only lit by the kitchen behind me. As I passed the bathroom, I noticed the door was slightly open. I always close it completely because the house drafts made it swing around. I reached out and nudged it shut, but when I let go, it slowly drifted open again. That alone wasn't unusual. What bothered me was that it had been open in the opposite direction earlier when I walked past it after work. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gap, and felt my chest tighten, not from fear yet, but from that uneasy awareness that something wasn't lining up with my memory. Maybe I'd bumped it earlier, without noticing. Maybe I hadn't closed it all the way. There were a dozen simple explanations, but my mind didn't believe any of them. Back in the kitchen, I tried to keep working, but the small noises continued. A faint scrape near the back wall. Then silence. Another soft shift of weight on gravel. Then silence again. The pattern felt intentional, like someone was stopping each time I stopped. I finally muted my laptop and sat there listening. No typing sounds, no distractions. Just cold, quiet air and the steady hum of the refrigerator. And then very softly I heard breathing. Not from inside the house, but from somewhere close to the kitchen window. A slow, steady, almost controlled. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before it stopped completely. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a moment. I just sat there staring at the blinds, trying to convince myself that I misheard it. That maybe it was wind or the heating system kicking in. Something harmless. Something explainable. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something outside was too close. And it was trying not to be heard. I stayed frozen in my chair for a long moment, listening for that breathing again. When it didn't come, I slowly stood up and stepped away from the window. I didn't want to look outside anymore. Not after noticing the blinds pushed open earlier. Every part of me felt tense, like my body already understood something my mind was still trying to deny. I reached over and quietly locked the back door, making sure the deadbolt clicked into place. A second later, the motion light in the backyard flashed on. I didn't go to the window. I didn't want to see anything. The timing was too perfect, too deliberate. The light stayed on longer than usual, like something was standing there, not moving. When it finally clicked off, the house fell into that heavy silence again. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. I backed up into the hallway, keeping my eyes on the kitchen, and that's when I heard something else, this time from the side of the house. A slow, dragging sound against the siding. Not brushing, dragging. Like someone's sleeve or coat scraping as they walked past the wall. The sound moved from the kitchen side, across the living room area, and then stopped beneath the small side window. The same window where the blinds were pulled aside earlier. My chest tightened. Whoever was out there wasn't just wandering around. They were checking specific parts of the house. Watching. Listening. Testing. I grabbed my phone from the table, but I didn't call anyone yet. I didn't want to explain a situation that I wasn't even sure was real. I paced back to the hallway and flicked on the living room light to make myself feel less alone. That's when I realized something that made my stomach sink even deeper. The front porch light, which I'd turned on earlier, was now off. Completely off. I hadn't touched it. And porch lights don't just switch themselves off. I stared at the front door, at the thin line of darkness visible through the bottom of the frame. The silence outside felt unnatural now. I could feel someone on the other side of that door. Not see, not hear, just feel. It was the same instinct you get when someone stands too close behind you in a store. Your body senses the presence before your brain does. Trying to stay calm, I walked to the door and quietly checked the lock. As soon as my hand touched the deadbolt, something on the other side shifted. Just a small sound, like a shoe adjusting on old wood. I froze. Not breathing. Not moving. Listening. Then another tiny movement. Then silence again. They were right outside. Right on the other side of the door. I stepped back slowly, heart pounding in my throat. Every exit in the house suddenly felt compromised. Front door, back door, windows. The hallway felt like it was shrinking, closing around me. I kept the lights on now, all of them, as if that alone could keep someone from trying to get in. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. Then the motion light in the backyard flashed on again. And this time, it didn't turn off. It stayed lit, as if someone was standing directly under it, waiting. The motion light in the backyard stayed on so long that I knew, without looking, that someone was standing directly beneath it. Not moving. Not hiding anymore. Just standing there, waiting for me to react. My throat felt tight, and my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone again. Every instinct in my body was telling me not to look out the window. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you panic. Don't show them where you are. But then something happened that forced me to look. A slow, deliberate knock came from the back door. Not loud. Not frantic. Just a gentle, steady tap. Like the kind of knock someone uses when they already know you're home. My entire body went cold. I stepped back into the hallway, putting distance between me and the kitchen. The knocking stopped for a moment, then came again, slightly harder this time. I backed farther away until I reached my bedroom, and I shut the door quietly behind me. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The operator answered, but before I could explain anything, I heard something from the kitchen. The back doorknob. It was turning. Slowly. Carefully. Someone was testing it. My voice cracked as I whispered to the dispatcher, telling her someone was trying to get inside my house. She told me to stay on the line and stay hidden. I locked my bedroom door, then moved into the closet, pulling clothes in front of me to muffle any sound. I tucked myself into the back corner and tried to control my breathing. The dispatcher asked if I could still hear the intruder. I could, but it wasn't coming from the kitchen anymore. Footsteps, soft, heavy, dragging, moved along the side of the house. Then I heard the scrape of something metal against the siding. I didn't know what he was using, but it sounded like he was testing the windows one by one. The back. When he reached the window closest to my bedroom, I held my breath so tightly it hurt. The sound was right beside my head, just a few feet away through thin walls and old glass. The dispatcher kept talking, trying to keep me calm, but her voice felt distant. Suddenly, the rattle stopped. Silence. A long, Heavy silence that felt worse than any noise. I didn't know where he had gone. I didn't know which side of the house he was on. For a moment I wondered if he had given up. Maybe he left. Maybe. Then the front doorknob shook violently. Not careful anymore. Not slow. He was trying to force it. The house echoed with each hard yank. The wood groaned. The lock clicked under pressure. I crouched lower in the closet, shaking uncontrollably, whispering to the dispatcher to please send someone faster. I heard footsteps pounding onto the porch, heavy, fast, and then the front door jolted, as if someone threw their full weight against it. The dispatcher suddenly said, "Officers are pulling up now. Stay where you are." Seconds later, loud banging erupted from outside, police yelling commands. And just like that, the noise at the door stopped. In one instant, the attacker disappeared. No footsteps leaving, no sound of running. Like he just melted into the darkness. The officers told me to stay inside the closet until they cleared every corner of the property. I could hear them moving through the house, calling out to each other, checking the windows, stepping out onto the porch. Their boots thudded against the old wood, solid and confident. Nothing like the slow, careful steps I'd heard from the man outside. After a few minutes, one of them knocked on my bedroom door and told me it was safe to come out. My legs were so weak I could barely stand. When I stepped into the hallway, there were 2 officers inside and another 2 walking around the yard with flashlights. Asked them if they had seen anyone. They exchanged a quick look that told me everything. No. Not a trace. I followed one officer to the front door. The frame had deep dents where someone had hit it hard, and the deadbolt was bent just enough to show how much force had been used. The officer knelt down, inspecting the marks. He looked up at me with a strange expression, some mix of concern and confusion. "Has anyone ever tried getting in before?" he asked. I shook my head. Never. They moved to the side of the house next, tracing the path the intruder had taken. That's when one of the officers called out softly, "Hey, you need to see this." We walked to the small window near the bathroom. The glass had faint smudges on it, long, pale streaks. Fingerprints. But not full prints. More like the marks someone would leave if they pressed their face against the window. The officer shined his light on the glass, and I felt sick. There was a faint circle where a forehead had touched. And below it, fog. Breath. Someone had been standing there long enough for their breath to miss the glass. But that wasn't the worst part. The officer stepped aside and pointed to the siding below the window. In the dirt, pressed into the narrow strip of mud along the foundation, was a footprint. But not the whole shoe, just the front half. As if the heel was missing. Or as if the person was dragging one foot and only putting weight on the front. My stomach dropped. I had heard that dragging sound earlier. The officer continued down the wall, following the footprints. They led past the living room, past my bedroom, and stopped behind the small crawlspace door near the back corner of the house. It was a low wooden panel with a metal latch, one I'd never used and rarely thought about. When the officer crouched down and tugged on it, the door opened immediately. The latch hadn't been locked for a long time. Maybe ever. The officer pointed his flashlight inside. The beam caught something instantly: fabric. A pile of it. And next to it, an empty water bottle, a torn granola wrapper, and a small black flashlight with dead batteries. Someone had been staying under my house. Not for one night. For a while. That buzzing feeling in my chest grew heavier when the officer pulled something else out, a small notebook. Dirty. Damp. The pages stuck together. He handed it to me, and when I opened it, every inch of the first page was covered in shaky handwriting. My address. My schedule. My routine. And a note written at the bottom. Wait for the lights. The police stayed at my house for nearly an hour after they found the crawl space. They took photos, bagged the notebook, and kept asking me questions. How long I'd lived there, whether I'd noticed anything strange before tonight, if anyone had been bothering me. I answered everything as best as I could, but the more I talked, the more surreal it felt. I kept looking at the open crawlspace door, trying to understand how someone could live just a few feet beneath me without me ever noticing. One officer told me they'd patrol the area throughout the night and send someone back in the morning to take more prints. Then they recommended I stay somewhere else for a while. I nodded, but I didn't move. I just stood in the hallway long after they left, staring at the floor, trying to process the idea that someone, some stranger, had been watching me for longer than I realized. When the last police car pulled away, the house felt too quiet again. That same unnerving stillness from earlier, but heavier now because I finally understood what it meant. I locked every door, checked every window twice, and turned on every light in the house. I even pushed a chair under the front doorknob, even though I knew it wouldn't stop someone determined to get in. I ended up sitting in the living room, phone in hand, waiting for the sun to rise. I wasn't planning to sleep. I didn't even want to close my eyes. The notebook kept replaying in my mind, my address over and over, my schedule written in shaky handwriting, the strange message at the bottom. Wait for the lights. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know. Around 4 a.m., when the house was completely still, I heard a sound I will never forget. A single, soft tap beneath the floorboards, right under where I was sitting. I froze. It didn't happen again, but I heard it clearly. A tap like someone testing a piece of wood from the other side. I told myself the officers had cleared everything, that nobody was down there anymore. But the sound was so clean, so sharp, and so close to where I sat that I felt my entire body go cold. I moved to the opposite side of the room and stayed standing until morning. A few hours later, when daylight finally started to fill the windows, a new patrol officer knocked on my door. He asked if I'd slept. I just shook my head. He told me they'd searched the crawl space again at sunrise. It was empty. Completely empty. But then he said something that made my stomach twist. They found fresh footprints in the dirt leading away from the opening. Only one set. Same partial shoe. Same dragging step. The tracks led across the yard, through the tree line, and disappeared into the field behind the house. They didn't know which direction he went after that. They didn't know how long he'd been watching me. They didn't know if he planned on coming back. The officer tried to reassure me, but nothing he said made the weight in my chest go away. When he left, the house felt even quieter than before. It's been months since that night. I moved out the same week and haven't returned. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is silent, I still hear that soft scrape along the siding. That slow drag of a shoe on gravel. That faint breath on glass. And I still don't know who he was. I still don't know how long he lived under my house. And the worst part is, every time a motion light turns on outside my new place, I can't shake the feeling he's still waiting.